Hello, I am Austin Baker of Baker's Dozens Productions, and welcome back to another episode of Exploring Experiences. On today's episode, we are going to get into the 10 secrets of experience design again. Um, in this case, we are going to get into a topic that I don't want to necessarily say it's controversial, but it's one that everybody has an opinion about. So there is a lot of information out there, some good, some bad. And so I am going to spend this episode trying to just pull it all together and give my 2 cents on this topic. So that topic is engagement. How do you keep your audience engaged? So when we talk about engagement, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different thought processes in terms of what does it mean to be engaged. And one thing that I kind of want to clarify before we get further into this episode is the difference between engagement and interaction. Okay, so the next sort of secret of experience design is interaction. And a lot of times when I would teach a class and would get to those two, my students would be like, well, aren't those basically the same thing? And I would say, no, they are not, right? Interaction is more about what you are doing. Engagement is more intrinsic. It's more about, do you actually care about what is going on, right? Maybe you see somebody giving a lecture, but do you actually care about the topic they're talking about? Are you actually paying attention? Quickest way, I always kind of say the shorthand to tell if your audience is engaged or not, especially if you are doing something face to face, whether that's, in a museum, in a brand activation, in a classroom setting, at a special event, whatever, right? The easiest thing in this day and age is to pay attention and see if they're on their cell phones, right? And that makes me totally sound like a boomer. Those kids on their damn phones, right? But that's not what I mean. If they are truly engaged in the experience that you are giving them, then they are going to be focused. They are not going to be, checking their email. They are not going to be texting their friends. They are not going to be scrolling social media, basically, trying to get away from whatever you are presenting to them, right? So first and foremost, that's what you got to do to gauge engagement. There's other ways that you can kind of visually in real time tell if someone is engaged with your experience or not. So for starters, in addition to checking their phones, are they watching the clock, right? Which nowadays, people look at the clock on their phones, but they might have a watch. They might be, actually looking at the clock on the wall to see how much time has passed, right? That instantly tells you that they care more about whatever comes next or, anything but what you are putting in front of them. So yeah, if they're watching the clock, then there's the other kind of telltale signs, are they yawning, right? Now yawning, they might just be tired, but you can usually tell, right? If you're giving a long lecture or going through a business pitch or, showing a film or something like that, and people are sitting there, nodding off, yawning, that's usually a sign that they're not very engaged, right? Or if they're, talking to their peers, right? Or in some cases they get up and leave. But that's like sort of the extreme circumstances. But yeah, then also there's just the body language stuff, like, are they rolling their eyes at what you're saying? Are they sitting there, lean back with their arms crossed over their chest? That's usually a very easy way to tell if somebody's actually engaged with what you are presenting to them or not, right? So that's just how you can tell visually in real time. Now, you also get all these sort of behind the scenes stuff, right? Repeat visitation. Are they interacting on social media? Are they volunteering for the organization? Are they donating money, right? Are they buying your product, right? In the business world, that is sort of the biggest indicator on if you are engaging customers or not is if they are buying your product or service, right? But you can also look at other things, right? You can look at um, are these audience members, are they asking questions, right? That's a simple one. You're in a presentation setting, you are at a brand activation, you are at an event. Are people actually asking questions and showing that they care about your product or service or the content you are putting in front of them? Are they sharing things unprompted, right? If you share a funny video on social media that's meant to raise brand awareness, are they sharing that organically, or are you having to incentivize them by offering a prize or something like that, right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but organic is always better, because that to me says that the audience actually is engaged with what you are putting out there and your brand and your organization and stuff like that. So yeah, there are many different ways you can kind of tell in real time. Then you also get into the visitor study stuff, which if you go back to my audience-centered design episode, we get into how you sort of measure whether or not your experiences and your products are designed for the correct audience. But that's take a listen to that if you are interested in that topic. We're not going to waste time here. So before we dive into sort of my 2 cents on the topic of engagement, I wanted to kind of give you guys some resources that have helped me all through my college years, helped me all through my teaching career, and still kind of help me to this day. Um, so first off is the book Cruise Chef's Shoe and Other Ways to Engage an Audience of 1 to 1,000. It's written by Roy Underhill. He is most famous for being the host of the Woodwrights Workshop on PBS. He did like a woodworking show, but he was also a historic interpreter at Colonial Williamsburg at one point. And so he knows a lot about audience engagement. And so that book, that is like the Bible of engagement in the experience design field. The second book that I want to mention is, shocker, The Experience Economy by Joe Pine and James Gilmore. That is the book that I always like to tell my students that was the book that kind of started it all, right? That was one of the books that kind of brought this idea that audiences are going to pay more for experiences over goods and services into the mainstream. It was there before, right? People were doing that before the experience economy came out, but that was the book that sort of brought it into the business world, brought it into the consciousness of people in the business world. So then we've also got The Shape of Engagement by Scott Gold, which, I have read that one, and it is very fascinating. What I really like about that one is it actually gives you sort of how-to models as opposed to being all theoretical. So that one actually gives you some advice on how do you roll up your sleeves and make yourself more engaging. Then you've got The Museum Experience by, and I've got it right here, John Falk and Lynn Durking. And that one, obviously, as the title suggests, is a bit more about museums and not-for-profits, right? Things like zoos and aquariums and museums and cultural heritage sites. So even though it is more on the not-for-profit side of things, it's got a lot of good information about what audiences want, how do you keep them engaged, specifically in content that they may not understand or that may be difficult for them to grasp, in addition to your organization as a whole. Then you've got The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. Again, that is one of my favorite books. I always gave a mini lecture on that book every time I taught my intro class, because they also give this framework as to how do you create memorable moments? How do you create moments that are going to engage people and stick with them for a long time. So highly recommend that one. Then the last one I want to talk about is called it's basically just called Immersion, the science of the extraordinary and the source of happiness, right? By Paul J. Zak. And now that one is probably the newest of all the books listed here, but it is fascinating. It gets a little bit more into the psychological side of immersion, of making your audience feel like they truly are completely engulfed in your experience, which, in my opinion, high level immersion equals optimal engagement. So yeah, there's a bunch more out there. Maybe somewhere down the line I'll mention more, but those are the ones that I think are like absolutely essential if you want to know how to engage an audience. So the first topic in terms of engagement that I want to talk about that I think is a double-edged sword, right? Which is the rewards and or punishment system for an audience, right? So you know how that goes, right? Oh, come to our event and you will be entered into a raffle to win a cash prize or a special product or whatever, right? A chance to go on a trip, that sort of thing, where you're basically almost bribing the audience to engage with you. Share this post on social media for a chance to get a $20 gift card or whatever, right? It works. It does work. You get people to share and, share your posts. You get people to come to your event. You get people to, buy into your raffle, whatever. But that's not really long-term engagement, right? That is essentially purely short-term dopamine engagement. So there's actually this wonderful quote that I read at one point that says, I got it right here, rewards can diminish performance and crush creativity. Because basically what that author was arguing is that by offering extrinsic rewards for engagement, it almost creates like an addict, right? It creates instead of, oh, I care about this museum, I care about this product, I think that this political message really resonates with me. It's like, well, no, I want to do this because I want to win money or I want to win something free, right? And that can honestly that can create even like hostility, right? If you have a bunch of people who are purely there to win a prize, they might get a little bit more competitive. You might have some cheating going on if you're doing like a competition sort of thing, right? The second you start bringing extrinsic rewards like money and gift cards and trips and free stuff, you completely change that shape of engagement that your audience has with your message and your product and your organization and all that. So it's good. It works, but I wouldn't rely on that, right? The best sort of engagement you can have is when your audience kind of goes to bat for you, right? Where they say, hey, I love this museum. I love this theme park. I love this teacher. I love this product. And, I actually like what they're saying. I enjoy their experience. I enjoy, spending my hard-earned time and money to go and interact with them, right? That is the sort of long-term engagement that creates lifelong customers, and in my opinion that is a lot better. But again, that is just my opinion. On the flip side of the sort of reward system is also the what I like to call the punishment system, right? Where my wife and I have been playing a lot of Diablo 4 recently, right? And I know they have their torment modes that we don't play, right? We're more casual, but those modes that are just like ridiculously difficult to the point of frustration, right? Any of the Souls games, so Dark Souls or Elden Ring or Bloodborne or anything like that, where it's like almost a rite of passage to lose a million times. And yeah, that does give you this sort of intrinsic reward that, oh, okay, I've lost a million times and then I finally won, right? All my hard work is paying off. That is more intrinsic. The thing is when you go with that sort of a difficulty level, and you see this in, theme parks and arcades and stuff like that too, like claw machines, right? Are designed, or really a lot of arcade machines with prizes are designed to intentionally be difficult. You go to certain theme parks and they have those little extra micro experiences like pulling the sword out of the stone at Disney, right? Which is supposed to be ridiculously difficult. Yeah, that, 1 in 1,000 chance that you actually succeed is going to make you feel great. But then everybody who is, dying a million times in this game, or, goes to Disney, once a year and never has been able to pull the sword out of the stone, right? It almost can lead to overt frustration and rage quitting, right? I know that is why I can never play any of these Souls games or any of those games that are just ridiculously hard, because I would, get 10 minutes into it, get frustrated, and then turn it off, right? And then never touch it again. So you got to be careful when you are doing rewards, but also when you are trying to sort of create that intrinsic reward of accomplishment through ridiculously hard and punishing tasks. So you always got to be careful with that. But on that topic, when you do succeed, it's the greatest feeling in the world, right? My friends and I and my wife, we do a lot of escape rooms, and some of them are pretty tricky. There was one we did recently, recently, this was several months ago, where we got it down to the last, I think we were down to the last like 90 seconds of the escape room before we actually solved it. And that was like, whoa, okay, that was a huge accomplishment, because we were struggling the whole time, but we still somehow pulled it off, right? That sort of a intrinsic reward by creating challenges that are fair, right? That are not ridiculously difficult. And we'll get into that later, especially in the interaction episode. But by creating a challenge with the right level of support, you can create this sort of intrinsic reward that is far more engaging than an extrinsic reward, I would say. But it doesn't even need to be challenges, right? So one of my favorite things to do is go to parks or go to zoos, go to aquariums, basically go anywhere where there's nature and animals, right? And to me, one of the reasons that's so rewarding is because you might, see something that you are not going to see every day or on TV, right? You go to Yellowstone and you see, when we were there, we saw like a bear making its den, right? It was far, far away. I had to look at it through binoculars, but it was still so cool to see, because that's not something that I can see in my home state. That's not something I can see, I guess I could look up a YouTube video, but it's not the same, right? Even if I went to Yellowstone multiple times, there's no guarantee I would see that again. And so to me, that's almost like way more rewarding than any sort of extrinsic prize or reward or anything like that. And the other thing with, going to these sort of experiences is the fact that you could go and see nothing at all, right? There was one time my wife and I were down in Tennessee, and we went to Cades Cove, and we went and we spent some time there, and we drove around and whatever, and we saw nothing. No bears, no deers, not even raccoons or anything, right? There was no nature at all. And so we went back another time, again, no nature at all. But a few years before that, we had gone and seen a family of black bears, right? So that was something that felt rewarding, but in a more intrinsic way. Now, I keep talking about rewards. I keep using the word rewards, both extrinsic and intrinsic, but don't think of rewards as being something physical, right? They can be, right? Especially with an extrinsic reward. But a reward could be something as simple as like a dopamine hit, right? A feeling of accomplishment, a feeling of pride, a feeling of purpose, right? And so when I'm talking about intrinsic rewards, especially in terms of experiences, a lot of times that's as simple as making somebody feel like they have spent their money well, right? They made the right choice in choosing this location to take their kids and their family for vacation, right? Oh, they picked the right school or the right major or the right class that maybe they weren't so sure about, right? So almost like a feeling of belonging as well. So when we're talking about rewards probably are not the right word, especially for the intrinsic side of things. But if you want your experience to be engaging, you have to give people something to care about, some sort of connection, make them feel attached with your message. So, if we're going to talk about this sort of intrinsic reward system, we gotta talk about the concept of flow. Now, this is a psychological term, so if you have studied anything in psychology and experience design in education, you've probably come across this topic at some point in time. But this concept of flow is something that was coined back in, I think, either the 70s or the 80s. I don't remember right off the top of my head, but by this guy called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And I think that's how you pronounce his name. I've looked it up on Google a million times. I will put it on the screen if you're watching the video of this so you can see how it's spelled and see why maybe it's a little bit confusing. But essentially, he came up with this concept of flow, this sort of concept of ultimate engagement. So he kind of lays out the sort of framework for creating an experience that produces optimal flow, right? So this sense of ultimate immersion, ultimate engagement, where you are so hyper focused on what's in front of you that nothing else matters, right? And so the first kind of element of a flow inducing experience is clear goals, right? Your guest, your audience, they need to understand what they are doing and why they are doing it and how to tell if they have completed it successfully or not, right? Obviously, in some cases, like with with a museum, okay, sometimes you will go in there and there's a mission statement at the very front, or there's usually some sort of video introduction, right? I know the Indianapolis Zoo has one of those now, where it kind of gives you this lowdown right as you walk in the door about this is who we are, here's what we care about, here are the things you're going to see and what we want you to learn, right? And so, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. When you take a class, right? If you are going to a business presentation, how does it usually start? It usually starts off with, hi, I am XYZ. Here are my qualifications. Today you are going to learn about this, 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 and this, and we're going to be talking about XYZ, right? So there are clear goals. By the time you are finished with this presentation, you will understand this concept better, or you will understand our target demographic better, or our Q4 sales better, or whatever, right? There is a clear goal. In the case of like a game, that's pretty straightforward, where okay, you are going to do this quest where you have to collect this item and take it here. And then you get some sort of reward, whether it's monetary or a special item or advance the story, whatever, right? But the goals of the experience are very clear from the get-go. Next up, you need immediate feedback, right? So, your audience needs to know whether or not they are getting any closer to those goals in real time. Again, in the case of like a game or an escape room or something like that, maybe you get checkpoints, or obviously if you if you lose, right, in an escape room, if you run out of time, if you if your character dies in a video game, okay, you're not getting closer to that goal you are trying to accomplish, right? But even things like, oh, again, we'll go back to the not-for-profit world. Say you're doing a fundraiser and your goal is to raise $10,000, let's just say. Okay, well, how do you give your audience feedback as to where you are? Normally, you might have a graph, right? I don't know if that's still popular, but the thermometer that you use dry erase marker on, that you fill in a little bit more every time you get a donation, right? There may be a counter that's on the screen, stuff like that, right? Museums and zoos, sometimes they do those little quirky little quizzes, right, where they'll be like, oh, you just read this tile and experienced this particular historical event. Can you tell me what happened with blah blah blah, right? And of course you're not graded on it or anything, but maybe if you get it wrong, you might say, oh, okay, maybe I need to go back and watch that video or read that tile or talk to that interpreter again, right? So you want to make sure your audience is getting immediate feedback if you want to get them in that state of flow. Then you need to make sure there's the right level of challenge and the right balance of challenge and skills. Now, there is this wonderful a chart that we always used to use in our experience design classes. I will put it on the screen here for any of you who are watching on YouTube. But it basically is Delot's, I believe his name was, but his matrix of challenge, right? Where essentially it says that if you give your audience something that is extremely challenging and you don't give them enough support to accomplish that challenge, they are just going to retreat, right? They are going to run away. They're going to say, this is too hard. I'm not doing this. If you give them something that is difficult, but then you actually give them the support that they need, that is optimal, because then that's going to help them grow as a individual, whether that's intrinsically or learning a new skill, learning something new, understanding your message and your content better, whatever. On the flip side of things, if you give them something that is easy and basically hold their hand through it, right, that's just gonna kind of inflate their ego artificially, right? And then last but not least, if you give them something that is super easy and then don't help them at all, then nothing's going to happen, right? They're not going to be transformed. They're not going to learn anything new. It's not going to do anything for them, right? So you got to have that right balance of challenge and skill. Now, a great example of this would be like if you were at a conference, right? You were doing a conference presentation to a bunch of engineers, right? And you bring out a box of scraps and set it down in front of them and say, hey, why don't you build something cool out of this? We're going to do a little contest, build something cool, and whoever builds the the most efficient or the coolest looking item wins. Okay, with a group of engineers, that's acceptable. You bring that out to a group of like historians, that's probably not going to end well, right? Because they do not have the right skill level for the level of challenge you are presenting to them, right? So if you want to get people into that state of flow, you gotta have that right balance of challenge. When your audience is in a state of flow, there is also this merging of action and awareness, right? They have this feeling like nothing else matters, right? They're not thinking about their bills. They're not thinking about, what they're going to eat for dinner. They're not going to be thinking about, the argument they had, with their friends a few weeks ago, or the latest episode of their favorite reality show, right? When they are participating in this experience, whatever that may be, they are right there in the moment. They are laser focused, completely immersed in what you are giving them, right? There's also this sort of loss of self-consciousness, right? Where I've also heard this called alibi for interaction, right? Or a magic circle, basically where they feel safe in this experience to do whatever they want without repercussions, right? To a certain extent, right? They don't feel like they are going to get made fun of. They don't feel like they're going to get ridiculed for asking a certain question. They don't feel like people are going to think they're childish or foolish for playing a game, right? Whatever. There's this loss of self-consciousness. There's also this sort of effect where time becomes distorted, right? Where maybe hours feel like minutes and time just goes flying by, and before you know it, you look at the clock and go, "Oh, it's it's way later than I thought. We should probably get going home." Right? And the most important thing, and this takes me back to the previous sort of block of statements that I've been rambling about today. If you want to get your audience in a state of flow, their motivation has to be intrinsic, right? They have to participate because they want to participate, not because they feel like they are getting some reward or they feel like somebody is forcing them to. They have to want to be there. So if you're looking for some more concrete examples of what flow looks like, I'm going to give you 3 examples from my own personal life. The first one is whenever a new season of Cobra Kai comes out. Right now, unfortunately, the show is over, so this will not be happening in the future. But my wife and I, whenever a new season of Cobra Kai would come out, we would sit down, we would watch it, and of course, we'd be like, next episode, next episode, next episode. And then we'd be like, oh my gosh, we just watched, 3/4 of the season in a single day, right? So binge watching a show, especially one that, again, you're actively paying attention to, not something you just toss on in the background and then you're fiddling on your phone or doing homework or talking to people or whatever, right? But when you binge watch a show that is actively engaging you, you get into this sense of flow. The second example is way back when I was in college. Well, I don't want to say the first of the new Star Wars Battlefronts came out. So it was for the Xbox One, right? So I'm trying to remember, was this like 15, 16, something like that? And at that time, my wife was working in home health and she did overnights sometimes. And so there was one night, it was a weekend night where I had nothing going on the next day. My wife was working an overnight. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pop in Star Wars Battlefront and just play for a while. Right. And I started at it's probably like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Right. I'm like, I'll play till I get tired. And I'm, playing, I'm going through all these rounds. I'm doing the different modes. I'm having a blast. Next thing I know, I hear birds chirping outside. And I kind of was like, what? And I peeked out the blinds. The blinds were closed. The curtains were closed. And sure enough, the sun was starting to come up and I looked over and it was 6 a.m. And I was like, oh, okay. I got a little carried away there. Right. But that's another example of flow. In that case, I was so engaged with that product, with that experience, that nothing else mattered and nothing was going to get me to stop. And, hours they felt like minutes. um, the last one's kind of a more funny example that I still get made fun of, for to this day. Back in my senior year of high school, I went on a trip to Disney World. Okay. And we went to Animal Kingdom, and I was, having a blast, and we went to the Kilimanjaro Safari attraction. Okay. So if you're familiar with that, that is the ride where you get on the little tour buses, and they, take you around, and you see a lot of different African animals that are in the wild, quote unquote, right? Where in reality, Disney has a bunch of ways to keep them in their own enclosures and to create optimal sight lines. That's a whole other podcast episode in and of itself, so we won't even get into that. But 18-year-old Austin was in the queue line, and I was so caught up in my Disney World experience, and I was, checking out the queue line and was like, oh, this is cool, right? And you saw all these signs of like, watch for poachers, and oh, this is a, safari park, and this is an official safari park, designated by the country of whatever country that they chose, right? And they have like all the different animal names in Swahili, right? It was awesome. But 18-year-old Austin was so caught up in the moment and so caught up and immersed in the experience, I thought it was real. I was like, wow, there's actually a safari nature preserve here in Central Florida. How cool is that? Right? And then, of course, when I got on the bus, and the story actually started, and I saw the animatronic elephants and stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, this is not real, right? But I was so caught up in my sense of flow with that experience that it could have been real to me. Creating flow is the most important thing you can do for any experience you can offer, right? Whether that's not for profit, whether that's for profit, whether that's in the business world, in the marketing world, in the event planning world, in the museum world, whatever, the theme park world, education world, any industry you are in, you want to get your audience into that state of flow if you want to engage them. Now, again, I could spend a lot of time going over different models. There's the PERMA model, which, again, if you've taken psychology, you might know. There's a couple models in the immersion book, and in the shape of engagement book, and the experience economy. But I kind of want to focus more on some of my own personal tips from BDPXD as to how to engage an audience. And so my cardinal rule after, focus on flow, do not just think you can create engagement by throwing money at an experience, right? Because it does not matter if you have a multi-billion-dollar experience if nobody cares about it, right? That at that point, it's all just bells and whistles, and it means nothing. It's all superficial, right? That is why you see, big budget movies that flop, right? Okay, you put all this money into the special effects and the paying for the actors, and getting good editors, and a high cost marketing campaign, right? But then if the story is bad, it doesn't matter, right? If the story's bad, if the acting's bad, if the message doesn't resonate with people, it doesn't matter how much money you put into it. It doesn't engage them, and thus it is going to be a failure, right? So do not just think, oh, we'll just shovel money into this and it'll be good. No. You need to get down to the sort of core of the message or the story or the core of your experience and kind of build out from there. Some of the best experiences I have ever had have been low budget. Okay. So there's always this story I love to tell of Mr. Rick Glassman, who was I don't even remember what his actual job was, but when I was in elementary school, he would come in every now and again and do talks about nature and animals, right? And it was always one of the best days of school because he was kind of, charming. He was funny. Sometimes he'd bring in animals that you could actually touch and, handle and stuff like that. One of the one of the comments that has always stuck with me forever was one time he started a conversation talking about wildfires, and he goes, Smokey the Bear should have got shot a long time ago. And of course, he then segued into because regular forest fires, cleared the debris from the forest, right? Which then means the next one won't be as bad as if you just let the debris keep accumulating, and then the wildfires get really bad and out of control, and it's not good for anybody, right? That costs nothing, right? He came in and he talked to us, and that is still one of the most memorable experiences of my childhood. Another one we had, and unfortunately, I saw this guy about a decade ago passed away, which made me really sad. But Mr. Gregor, Mr. Gregor, he was a former electrician who, or maybe it was Gregor, I don't remember, but I remember him very fondly. He would come into elementary school classes and he would read to us. He was a former electrician, and I don't even know why he did it, but he would always come into our school and we'd do story time. And, he had these green mints that he would always give out to us if we, behaved and were good. And, he would always make comments at the beginning where he would, he would try to make everyone laugh, and the kids loved him. But again, he brought in a book and he read to us, but because of his sort of charisma, because of the way he handled himself, the things that he did during those story times, it still sticks with me today, and I'm getting warm and fuzzy feelings just talking about it right now, right? So you don't need to be big budget to create great experiences. Another one that again was low tech, low budget, but it just sticks with me was a few years ago. My wife and I and some friends, we went on a week-long trip to Branson, Missouri. Okay. And we went to the world's largest toy museum. And you can find videos of this on YouTube. You can find all sorts of stuff, walkthroughs and things of that nature. And it's always interesting because when I've shown people the walkthroughs and the pictures, they're like, this doesn't look like anything. This does not look that good. But when you're actually there, yeah, it's very engaging. So, a lot of their displays, obviously it's toys and games, all throughout history. And most of their displays are like bookshelves with plexiglass, on the front, and maybe like signs that you can tell they printed off themselves, right? They are not a very high budget museum. But even though they, maybe don't have the most classy or the most modern exhibits out there, right, compared to something like the Museum of Play out in New York, right, which is high budget, and it kind of deals with the same topic. On an engagement level, it works. There's this feeling of nostalgia. You can tell the curators and the designers actually like really care about the topic that they are putting on display, that they're trying to educate about. And you've also got these little like interactive stations every now and again of like, oh, you can play with army men on this mountain we built. Oh, you can play these classic board games against each other. Oh, make this diorama out of these classic toys, right? It's another example of low budget, but high experience. And so, in my opinion, that is what you want to go for. You have to have a good experience, a good story, a good message, a good understanding of your audience at the core, or else it's just not going to work. The thing that I always get asked when I'm talking about engagement is, well, okay, it's a very subjective thing. So how do you measure engagement? And nobody ever likes the answer because it is subjective, right? And how your industry or your institution, or even at an individual level in your job role, how you measure engagement is going to look vastly different, right? How a marketing department looks at engagement is going to be vastly different than how a sales department measures engagement, or how um, a HR company measures or a HR office measures engagement, right? And so, depending on what industry you're in, depending on what your company values, what you value as an individual, it's going to be vastly different. So, my advice is figure out what you think engagement means. What does it mean for someone to be engaged with your experience, with your product, with your services, with your content, right? And then measure that. So, there's all the typical stuff, right? Your customer satisfaction surveys and your visitor observations and stuff like that. We went over that in the audience-centered design episode, so we're not going to go over that again. But there's lots of ways to measure it. But some of the more interesting ways to measure engagement come from vastly different industries. So one of the ones that stuck out to me is the themed entertainment industry. So a lot of places like theme parks actually measure the success of their experiences, their attractions, based on attraction length versus queue line wait time, right? So if you're looking at something like Rise of the Resistance or Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, or things of that nature, where it's maybe a less than 10-minute experience, but people are waiting 2, 3, even more hours just to go on it, that is seen as a major success. Whereas on the flip side, if you have a 20-minute show that you can walk right into and, sit right down and there's no wait, that's seen as not as successful. But that's very specific to that industry. You look at, museums and zoos and aquariums and things of that nature. Theirs is going to look differently. They're going to look at things like community impact, raising awareness, fundraising, securing of grants, attendance, things like that. Whereas you go to a store or a event services company, right? They are probably going to be looking more at things like pure profits, ROIs, things of that nature. So engagement is going to look different based on your own personal experiences and the industry you are in. Now, one thing that I would say all industries and all individuals could use to measure engagement is word of mouth. So there's actually a interesting little formula that I found that helps you measure word of mouth. And that is, I got it right here. It is word of mouth equals 17N plus N, whereas N equals the number of people who interacted with your experience. So like say, okay, you host an event that has 100 people, your word of mouth based on that formula would roughly be 1,717 people will have heard about your experience, right? That doesn't mean they're going to necessarily engage with it or come to your institution or buy anything from you, but they are at least aware of this event or product or service happening. So really, really think about that. next time you are looking at your engagement metrics and think about, well, how many people did we actually reach with this launch event, with this brand activation, with this new exhibit that we just opened up, right? Because that can tell you how quickly your message might be spreading. So now comes the part of the episode that everyone's probably, been waiting for me to get to this whole time after all this rambling. Um, how do you make an experience engaging for your audience? Now, um, obviously, I'm going to do shameless plug here and say the incorporation of the 10 secrets of experience design are going to be the best thing that you could possibly do. And just quick refresher in case you're not familiar with that is, it is a theoretical concept that myself and a bunch of my peers came up with for a conference we did back in 2018 that I have basically incorporated into every experience that I have created and all of the classes I taught and all of my business endeavors ever since. But just a quick refresher. So in order to make an experience optimal, right, you've got to have multisensory elements. It's got to tell a story. It's got to have some sort of whimsical or unexpected nature to it. It's got to be audience centered. It's got to be engaging, which is what we're talking about this episode. It's got to be interactive. It's got to be transformative. It's got to be layered. It has to evoke some sort of emotion, and it has to be authentic. Now, spoiler alert, every few episodes, I basically cover one of these secrets in depth. So we are on engaging right now, obviously. So we are on secret number 5 of the 10. So there will be more to come, I promise. And you can do a little bit more in-depth research on each of those at your own leisure. Another thing that you really want to make sure you are doing with any experience you create, again, whether this is an event, whether it's a museum exhibit, whether it's a brand activation, whatever, right? Any experience you're creating, you want to evoke your audience into using type 2 thinking, right? So that's a psychological term. If you've ever done any study in psychology, you've probably heard of this, but it is basically that type of thinking where you have to actively be paying attention, right? You can't sort of be off in la la land. You can't be thinking about what you're eating for dinner tonight, or reminiscing on happy memories or something like that, right? You are kind of there, focused in the moment because you need to pay attention. The best example I have seen of this is in the book Designing Experiences by Rossman and Durden. They talk about type 1 versus type 2 thinking, and they use the example of going on a hike, right? If you're just walking along a trail and, birds are out, the sun is shining, everything is nice, you're walking down the trail and you're in type 1 thinking, right? You're walking, you're, kind of just in your own head, thinking whatever. But then you hear the sound of a rattlesnake rattle, right? Suddenly, your brain snaps into type 2 thinking, where you actively have to pay attention because, there could be danger around, right? And so I'm not saying put your audience in danger, right? But you want to give them stimuli that snap their brains into that type 2 thinking, where they can't just kind of sit back and be passive. So how you do that, you got to do a lot of trial and error, right? But give them something that they actively have to be interacting with. And again, that could be Q&A, that could be I don't want to say forced participation, but audience participation. That could be an interactive activity, right? That could be even as simple as, you see this in high school and college classes all the time, of like, oh, I'm going to randomly call on someone to answer, right? That usually snaps your audience, in that case the students, into type 2 thinking, because they have to be alert. They have to be prepared in case they get called on. So always include stimuli that prompt your audience into type 2 thinking, and that will go a long way in creating engagement. Something that I have found works really well, though I will put the disclaimer on here, it's not applicable to everything, right? So a lot of these solutions are situation based. They're not, it's not a one size fit all thing. And the concept of gamification is equally not one size fits all. But we could spend an entire episode talking about gamification. I might somewhere down the road once I'm finished with the 10 secrets. But gamification is basically the idea of taking game elements. Now, this is not turning your experience into a game, right? It's taking elements of games and putting them into your experience. So that could be something like, leaderboards, right? Or you see this all the time with different businesses where they have like rewards programs, right? That is taken right from the video game industry, right? Where, you do X amount of tasks. In this case, you buy X amount of products or spend X amount of money, and then you get a reward, right? It's the same thing you see in RPGs and stuff like that. So that is gamification in its most broad sense. But that could also be things like adding competition. That could be, creating something that is a little bit more, what we call open world, right? So you go to a place like Meow Wolf or Otherworld, Ohio, and even some museums do this, right? It's not a linear story. It feels like an open world game where you kind of pick your own adventure, right? So gamification is great if it is appropriate to the content that you are putting out there. Now, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record with this next one, but it is vital. It is vital to basically all aspects of experience design. And that is visitor studies. Know your audience, right? We did a whole episode on this. Understand who you are trying to attract with your product or your experience or your event and the content you're putting out there. And part of that is getting to understand what is going to be engaging to them, right? For example, if I went to a museum that was nothing but, bright colored videos of like dancing fruit, I've seen those on YouTube, right? That's not going to be very engaging for me in my age group and my demographic, right? Likewise, if you are, doing a museum experience that is sharing memories of Woodstock, that's probably not going to resonate with the younger audience, right? So you got to understand what interests your audience and what is going to engage them. And again, that could be, completely different, right? Like even like the types, we'll go back to gamification, the types of games that are going to appeal to Gen Z and Gen Alpha are going to be different than the ones that are going to appeal to Gen X and millennials, right? Again, even just the content you're putting out there, right? If you are making references to shows from the 70s, likely it's going to be the boomer and Gen X generation that actually find the appeal in that, right? Now that's not to say that nobody in the younger generations will understand the reference, right? But if you are shooting for, a Gen Alpha crowd, right, and appeal to Gen Alpha, and you're making references to I Love Lucy, that's probably not going to be super engaging to them, right? So you got to know your audience. And there's a wonderful quote that kind of goes with this concept of knowing your audience and engaging them. And that comes from Roy Underhill in the book Khrushchev's Shoe, where he says, I have the quote right here. He says, if the law is on your side, argue the law. If the facts are on your side, argue the facts. If neither is on your side, pound the table, right? So basically what he's explaining there is, how do you engage somebody with your content? Well, if the law, in this case, we'll say you're selling a product, and we'll say the law is like the cultural norms, right? Okay, if everybody is jumping onto this trend, you have that on your side. You don't really have much work to do in terms of proving yourself and engaging the audience, right? If the facts are on your side, right? If you actually have created something that is revolutionary, right? You don't have to lie about it, and you can just say, hey, this event is one of a kind. You are never going to find anything like this anywhere else in the world. Okay. And it would be the truth. And that would engage people and appeal to people. And if neither of those on your side, just go crazy, right? Nutter Butter, right? The snack recently has done this pivot in their marketing where on their TikTok page, if you have not seen Nutter Butter's TikTok, you need to go check it out. It is bizarre. They basically pivoted to this sort of surrealist, almost creepy, liminal. I don't even know how to explain it, but it's working, right? This is the first time I have thought about Nutter Butter in years, probably over a decade, right? And it's all because of this strange pivot in the message they are putting out there to engage their audience. So yeah, know your audience, and if worst comes to worst, just do something completely out there that will get people talking, and you will get engagement. Now I'm going to steal something again from the Walt Disney Corporation, which, of course, in the world of engaging an audience, I mean, you don't get much better than the Disney theme parks, right? But one of their sort of cardinal rules, right, is this idea of they call it the "it's a small world" effect. So it's basically this idea that you repeat the same thing over and over and over until your message has just been beat into your audience's head so much that they can't ignore it, right? So obviously it's called the "it's a small world" effect because if you've ever gone on the ride Small World at any of the Disney parks, it's the same musical track over and over and over through the whole ride. And even just bringing it up right now, it's getting stuck in my head, right? Walt Disney himself once told one of his designers, they were like, well, why are you spending so much time, on the music for the rides? Shouldn't we be focusing more on the actual technology? And Walt Disney's response was, well, people don't walk out of the park whistling the architecture, right? So yeah, obviously musical cues, that's a big one. If you have a specific music or sound clip you want associated with your experience, play it over and over and over, right? One of my favorites is, as you see, I'm wearing a Colts zip up right now. If you're watching the video, but when you go to Lucas Oil Stadium for a Colts football game, every time the Colts get a first down, the announcer comes on and goes, "That's another Indianapolis Colts first down," and everyone chants along with it, right? That happens every game, every time they get a first down. And so, yeah, even me just thinking about the experience of going to a Colts game, that is kind of one of the core tenets that I remember, right? That, and I heard, I didn't get to go to any games last year, unfortunately, but I heard that they changed this, which is kind of disappointing. But they used to, every time they would score a touchdown, they would play "Bang the Drum All Day," the song. You can look it up if you want to. I'm sure you know it. It's very popular in pop culture. But again, I associate that song with the experience of going to a Colts game, right? So it can be musical, it can be audio, but it can even be things like recurring motifs or recurring visuals, right? If you have a logo or a mascot or a certain color scheme that you want associated with your brand, just make sure every single piece of content you create, whether that's a live event, whether that's marketing materials, videos, whatever, incorporates that sort of visual, right? Movies do this all the time. One of my favorite movies is Psycho, right? Alfred Hitchcock back in the 60s. They intentionally included choppy visuals because they wanted it to feel sort of disorienting and almost like, obviously, the iconic scene with the knife in the shower, right? Very stabby, very choppy. And so yeah, you can do this with just about anything. But it's repetition, 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 and just find whatever you want associated with your experience and keep repeating it over and over and over. And that will get people to pay attention and remember and thus engage at a deeper level. Another thing you got to remember is treat your audience like they're smart, right? I have seen this too many times in the college classroom as specifically as a student, right? Sometimes with marketing, sometimes with people at live events, right? The second you treat your audience like they don't know what they're doing and that they're not intelligent, you'll lose them and you are never going to get them back. Right. We did an event for a company that will remain nameless where we were doing this we were attempting to do an immersive experience that we had I'm trying to remember. There was a house setting and then an office setting, right? And the idea was that the guests would walk in and then they would interact with live characters in there that would then teach them stuff. Okay. Well, one of the people that we were designing this event for wanted to and would not back down on they had to put in front of the experience. They wanted to put up a sign that said, "Welcome to our pretend house and our pretend office." And it's just like, okay, you're treating the audience like they're stupid and they're not going to engage, right? You've already insulted their intelligence. So even if you think you can teach your audience something new, right? Treat them like adults, treat them like they're intelligent human beings, because if not, you are not going to engage. The other thing you need to keep in mind is that you're going to have to earn their trust, right? Especially if you're trying to sell them a product, or if you are in the concept of the experience economy, you are trying to get them to spend their hard-earned time at your experience or institution. They got to trust you, right? And so they need to know, who you are, what you're about, maybe sometimes your core values. They want to know what your past successes are, things of that nature. And another thing I would kind of challenge any organization, especially one that is selling products or experiences, address skeletons in your closet, right? The worst thing you can do is a cover up, right? There's a local institution right now that is kind of getting dragged through the public discourse because one of their employees was injured by an animal on the job, right? And they tried to kind of make it hush hush. And it finally came out. And now every single piece of content that they post, people are making jokes about it. People are upset about it. And so, yeah, just be upfront, be honest, and address the skeletons in your closet. Because in my opinion, it takes a lot of guts to say, hey, we made this mistake. We messed up. But here's how we're going to fix it. Right. If you go back to our storytelling episode, we talk about this idea that to make an optimal experience that tells a good story, your guest has to feel like they are the protagonist of the story. Okay. Now, if the guest is the protagonist, then guess what? If you want to engage them, that means you, as a designer, a creator, have to be the antagonist, right? So you have to be the Joker to their Batman, or the Green Goblin to their Spider-Man, or the Ivan Drago to their Rocky Balboa, right? You have to be their, I don't want to say enemy, right? Because that's a negative connotation, but you have to provide them with challenges to overcome. Now, obviously, if you're doing something that's a little more gamified, that is pretty obvious, right? Complete this physical challenge, solve this riddle, solve this puzzle, whatever, right? But even then, you can do things like challenge their belief system, right? Play devil's advocate. You're creating educational content, whether that is in a classroom setting or at a museum or zoo or aquarium or whatever, right? Ask those sort of questions that are going to stimulate introspection on the guest's part. Ask things that maybe aren't popular, right? That will at least get them thinking, or that your audience isn't going to like, because again, that at least gives them a different perspective, and it challenges them to view a topic differently, right? Um, Also, um, what this does when even if you are, you know, asking a question that gets them thinking, and maybe they come to the conclusion that, they're not going to change their beliefs, and here is why. Okay, they have still learned something about themselves, right? They have still accomplished something. And if you look at the PERMA model, which is a really, really popular psychology model about how to create engagement, I would definitely, we're not going to take time out of this episode, but I would look it up. One of the tenets of the PERMA model is achievement, accomplishment, making people feel good about themselves. And by playing the antagonist in an experience, whether that's physical challenges, whether that's mental challenges, whether that is gamified challenges, whether that is devil's advocate questions, whatever, right? Once the protagonist overcomes that obstacle, they're going to feel this sense of accomplishment and pride that they wouldn't get if you just reinforced basically everything that they already knew, right? And so, yeah, be an antagonist. I cannot emphasize enough, make the experience or the content or whatever you are creating, make it fun, right? Make it don't make it boring. Don't make it sort of ho hum and feel like a drag to get through, because then it will feel like a drag to get through and nobody's going to want to engage with it. We've all had that professor that just, drones on and on and on and on. With the same monotone voice about the same topics, and it's the same thing day after day after day, right? That is the opposite of engagement. That is honestly, that is actively stimulating disengagement. So you want to make it fun. Remember that the opposite of play is not work. It's actually depression, right? So, you want to make sure that you are playful, that your experience is fun. One of the best things I think you can do is make people smile, right? And at a event, at a brand activation in the classroom, right? Install a little bit of humor, make people feel like a kid again, right? Hit them with nostalgia. That is going to engage them. Now, I will say, not every single experience probably needs to be fun. You've got, museums that maybe deal with heavy topics like the Civil Rights Museum or the Holocaust Museum or things of that nature. Also, like fundraising events that might be for serious topics like, cancer research or raising money for victims of tragedy, right? Those probably don't need to necessarily be fun, but that is where, if you go back to the whimsical, unexpected episode, I talk about that a little bit more. Even if you don't want something to be fun and whimsical, because, maybe it's not appropriate, you can still make it unexpected and kind of flip the script and make it engaging that way. The last tip that I want to kind of give you in terms of creating something that's engaging is the devil's in the details, right? Make it as detailed and rich as you possibly can, whether that's from a story perspective, whether that is from a visual perspective, whether that is from a exploratory perspective, right? You want to reward your audience for repeat visitations, because the more detail you have, the more likely they're going to miss something. And if they miss something, then that means they're going to have to come back and try to find it again, right? theme parks do this really well. Immersive art installations do this really well. Museums do this really well. Um, Festivals do this really well too, I would argue, right? Where it's just there is so much going on. There are so many booths to explore. There are so many activities going on that you're not going to hit them all, right? You have to prioritize, what you want to do on specific days, which then means, okay, you either have to come back another day or come back another time, right? So yeah, and even places, retail stores can do this, right? So one of the best examples is Bass Pro Shop, right? If you have ever been to a Bass Pro Shop, they are so incredibly detailed down to the sort of the setting on the table, right? You check out like the desks at a Bass Pro Shop, and there are going to be little tiny details that you didn't catch before. IKEA does this well, obviously. I'm trying to think of other retail stores that do this well. Those are kind of the two iconic ones. Places like Rainforest Cafe, right? That's more of a restaurant. Bubba Gump's, right? Basically, there's a great quote from a book I used to teach from in my global experience design class that said, "We achieve deeper meaning through deeper theming," right? So the more lore, the more story, the more little details that you include in an experience, the more likely you are going to have repeat visitation. Disney does this with their hidden Mickeys, right? If you're not familiar with the hidden Mickeys, those are basically little Mickey Mouse shapes. So you probably have seen it, the big circle and the two little circles that is like the symbol for Mickey. They have those hidden all around the Disney parks, and so some guests have kind of made it their goal to try to find every single one of them, right? There are like apps that you can use to like check off, oh, I found this hidden Mickey, right? Details matter. And this, it doesn't even have to be a live event either. This could be video content, right? This could be a TV show. There's so many TV shows out there that you go back and you rewatch and you catch little things that you didn't notice the first time, and then you're kind of like, oh, it feels like a little dopamine hit of like, oh, I'm so smart, now I know that they included this because it's foreshadowing for this event that happens later in the show, right? Video games do it. Even nowadays you're seeing marketing campaigns that have this sort of depth and detail. So that is honestly something that is super easy to do. All it costs you is time. But the more detail you put into your experience or your product or your content, the more engaging it is going to be. So I think I've rambled on long enough for this episode. So hopefully you have learned something about engaging an audience with an experience or with content or with whatever product you are putting out there in the world. And yeah, one thing I will say is that of all the 10 secrets, I would argue engagement is the most important, because if you do not engage your audience, everything you say, everything you present to them is just going to fly right over their head, and they are not going to care. So, I am Austin Baker of Baker's Dozens Productions, and I will see you on the next episode of Exploring Experiences.